The wineglass caught the chandelier light just as my father said it. We wish Claire was our only child. Silence fell like a curtain. Forks stopped. Eyes turned. My mother took a sip of wine, like nothing had happened. Claire smirked. And me? I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, because in that moment, I finally saw them for what they were. Not family, just witnesses to their own downfall. It was supposed to be a celebration, not a declaration of exile. A warm September evening, candles trembling against white linen, the hum of laughter bouncing off glass and silver. My parents' 36th anniversary dinner was meant to honor family. Instead, it revealed who didn't belong. We were at a quiet restaurant on the waterfront in Portland, the kind with chandeliers that made every lie look softer. My sister, Claire, was already glowing at the center of the table, her voice practiced, her charm polished to perfection. I'd barely unfolded my napkin before an uncle leaned close and said, "Heard Claire's running regional sales now. Must be in your genes." I smiled the same polite smile I'd mastered since childhood, the one that hides the sting behind grace. Every word about her was a mirror turned away from me. The night followed its old rhythm, laughter orbiting Claire, applause tossed like confetti. I stayed quiet, not because I didn't have words, but because I'd learned silence keeps the peace. Then came the toast. My father rose, glass in hand, tie slightly loosened, the picture of warmth, until his voice hardened. "To family," he said. His eyes lingered on Claire, then, clear as crystal, "Honestly, we wish she was our only child." The world froze mid-breath. Someone's fork hit their plate. Claire didn't even blink. She just smirked, as if she'd earned the right to be the favorite. My mother sipped her wine, unmoved. And in that stillness, all the years of quiet endurance folded into a single truth. This was never about love. It was about power. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I simply smiled, a small, knowing one. The kind you give when you realize the game has ended and you're finally done playing. That was the moment I understood. Love that demands your invisibility isn't love. I stood, smoothed the napkin on my lap, and whispered, "Enjoy your night." My heels clicked against the hardwood as I walked out, not escaping but evolving. Outside, the night air bit against my skin, sharp and clean. My chest was tight, but my steps were steady. I didn't know it then, but that was the night the silence stopped serving them, and the reckoning quietly began. I used to believe invisibility was safety, that blending in was the price of peace. But peace bought with silence is just a quieter kind of erasure. Claire was always the sun in our family. I learned early that I was expected to orbit her light, quiet enough not to interrupt the glow. In 8th grade, I placed 3rd in the state math finals. That same weekend, Claire had a small theater recital. My parents forgot the competition completely. They showed up to her show an hour early, flowers in hand, smiles rehearsed. When I told them later that I'd won, Mom blinked, like she was trying to remember if she'd even heard about it. "Well, Claire was so nervous for her big solo," she said. As if that explained why my moment didn't matter. It didn't break me. It just taught me to predict it. Every celebration after that became a performance. Claire center stage, Mom prompting her stories, Dad nodding along. I learned to smile, refill the glasses, and fade into the edges. Because that's how ghosts survive. We shrink so others can sparkle. By my late 20s, I'd built a quiet, steady life in financial consulting. The kind of work that rewards precision, not personality. I helped small businesses avoid collapse, even as I quietly saved my parents from their own. Their store, tucked between a dry cleaner and a vape shop in a fading Portland strip mall, wasn't thriving. It was surviving on me. Every few months came the same message. "Sweetheart, can you check the books again?" And I always did, at first out of duty, then out of reflex. I wired money, rebuilt their systems, and negotiated their vendors. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even noticed, but it kept their lights on. Once I stayed up until 2 a.m., fixing a tax error that would have cost them thousands. The next morning, exhausted but proud, I told Mom it was resolved. She smiled, that soft, polished smile, and said, "Great." Claire's working on a new summer window display. That was when I learned silence can bruise just as hard as words. Claire's marketing ideas were all surface, chalkboard slogans, pastel racks, and Instagram filters. Meanwhile, my spreadsheets kept the doors open. But my parents didn't want stability. They wanted a savior, and Claire wore that cape proudly. At family gatherings, they called her the face of the store. No one mentioned the unpaid bills I'd covered or the weekends I'd spent rewriting their books. I was the ghost in the back office, holding up the walls while they admired the paint. Then one afternoon, Claire announced a branding refresh. Dad lit up like a man hearing prophecy. "She's got the kind of business mind you can't teach," he said. I was sitting 3 feet away, laptop open, showing him how to cut costs by 12%. He didn't look. They told me not to overcomplicate things, that Claire's ideas had heart. That word, heart, became their favorite shield. It excused every bad decision every time they chose performance over reality. It wasn't that they didn't know who was saving them. It was that admitting it would break their illusion. So I kept helping, not out of love, but habit. Some small, stubborn part of me still waited for the words I'd never hear. "We couldn't have done this without you." The night that would split everything open. But some truths don't need confrontation, only the right silence to reveal them. Their 36th anniversary. The restaurant glowing in candlelight. Claire in the center seat, basking in attention that was never hers to earn. A cousin leaned forward, laughing. "Claire, I saw the store's Instagram. You're killing it." She smiled, that polished public smile. "It's all about the visuals," she said. What she didn't say was that the sales surge came from the supplier deal I'd negotiated 2 months earlier. I just twirled my pasta and listened, quiet, predictable, until I wasn't. During a pause in conversation, I took a breath. "I've been reviewing the store's numbers," I said carefully. "You're losing money on overstock. If you adjust the inventory and trim the vendor list, you could save thousands." It wasn't a speech, just a suggestion, a nudge toward sanity. The table went still. Claire tilted her head, her smile sharp. "Inventory," she said, almost sweetly. "That's cute. Stick to your spreadsheets. I've got ideas." A few cousins laughed, unsure why. My stomach twisted, but I kept my voice calm. Mom leaned forward. "Sweetheart, let's not bore everyone with numbers. Claire's planning a pop-up this summer. It's going to be huge." Dad didn't even glance up. "Claire knows what she's doing," he muttered. I sat back, hands folded. It wasn't rejection anymore. It was erasure, again. But this time I felt something different stirring beneath the silence. It wasn't pain. It was the beginning of clarity. Claire laughed, short, sharp, dismissive. "Vendors, spreadsheets, you really don't get the big picture, do you?" Her voice sliced through the room like glass. The table murmured, soft chuckles, side glances, a shared permission to humiliate me in public. Mom smiled too tightly. "Let's move on," she said, waving the tension away. "Claire, tell them about your new ad campaign." The crowd relaxed. I didn't, because I knew what was coming next. I just didn't know it would come in the form of a toast. Dad stood, steady and practiced. He raised his glass with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "To family," he said. A pause. "To 36 years of love, and to our pride and joy." He looked directly at Claire. Then, with the calm precision of someone stating a fact, he added, "Honestly, we wish she was our only child." The words didn't echo. They landed, heavy, final, irreversible. A fork hit a plate. Someone gasped. Claire didn't even blink. She smirked, the kind of smirk that said she'd already won. Mom sipped her wine like it was just another Tuesday. And me? I sat still. I felt the familiar burn rise in my chest, that ache of being unseen. But I didn't cry. I nodded once, calm, controlled. Then I stood, slow enough for the silence to stretch. The sound of my chair scraping the floor was the only applause I'd ever get from that table. "Enjoy your night," I said, and I walked away. My heels echoed through the hallway, one step after another, each sharper than the last. Outside, the Portland air was cold and clear, cutting through my shaking hands. But my stride stayed steady. That was the night I stopped chasing them. No more proving, no more patching, no more pretending this was love. Something had ended, and I could feel something new stirring beneath the wreckage. Not revenge, not yet, just clarity. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the couch. The city outside kept breathing. I finally didn't have to. We wish she was our only child. It wasn't anger. It was clarity, the kind that burns clean. I opened our family group chat, Dad, Mom, Claire, and me, and typed 12 words that rewrote everything. "I'm done helping with the store. No more money, no more advice. Good luck." Then I hit send, no explanations, no warnings, just the sound of a boundary locking into place. The phone buzzed immediately. Dad called twice. I let it ring. Then came Mom's messages, confusion dressed as concern. "What's this about? Call me now." And another, "We can't do this without you." Claire's text arrived last. One word, "Seriously." I stared at the screen. They weren't shocked that they'd broken me. They were shocked that I'd stopped fixing them. By morning, there were more voicemails. One calm, one pleading, one angry. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. Then came Mom's long email, nostalgia and guilt, stitched together like a trap. Suddenly, the legacy of the store mattered. Suddenly, they'd always appreciated me. I closed the laptop, blocked Claire, muted Mom, set Dad's number to auto-delete. Not out of spite, out of peace. I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking back to myself. Claire didn't stop after the first post. 2 days later, she struck again, another sweet caption wrapped in venom. Some people prioritize spreadsheets over family. No wonder they're alone. Beneath it, a photo of her. Perfect lighting, perfect smile, perfect lie. The kind of picture that says success to everyone who doesn't know the truth. I didn't respond. I didn't scroll. Not at first. Then came the messages. Old classmates, former coworkers. "Hey, is everything okay? Saw some things online." Their words were polite. Their tone wasn't. That's how gossip works. It doesn't accuse you directly. It just leaves room for you to hang yourself with silence. Claire didn't need to lie outright. She just hinted that I was too intense, that I burn bridges. No proof, just poison. And slowly I could feel the edges of my reputation, the one I'd built through years of quiet competence, start to fray, not because I'd failed, Because silence always looks guilty. I wanted to fight back, to post the receipts, the transfers, the late-night fixes. But that's what she wanted, a performance. And I refused to audition for her version of me. So I disappeared, blocked her everywhere, deleted the family group chat, let her talk, let her perform. Because the truth doesn't beg to be believed. It just waits for the noise to die down. At work, I felt the hesitation, glances that lasted a second too long, a pause mid-sentence. But I didn't defend myself. I met every whisper with results. Reports clean, numbers sharp, strategy airtight. If they wanted to know who I was, they could check the data. Still, it stung, not because of the lies, but because of how familiar the silence felt. I'd lived here before, watching someone else narrate my story. Only this time I wasn't disappearing, I was waiting, and they had no idea what was coming next. In the days that followed, the silence felt different, not heavy, just empty. For years I'd carried the proof of everything I'd done for them, tucked away in folders and bank logs. Receipts of a life no one ever acknowledged. But there was one person who had always noticed, even when he said nothing. My grandfather, Henry. He'd been the quiet witness to all of it, the one who slipped me checks for textbooks, who once told me, "You don't have to be loud to be right." And suddenly I knew exactly where I needed to go, not out of impulse, out of clarity. Because sometimes the only way to be seen is to stand before the one person who always did. My grandfather, Henry, was my father's father. Quiet, practical, the kind of man who didn't waste words because he didn't need to. He'd never picked sides, but he'd always noticed everything. He owned several old plots of Florida land, property he'd bought when no one else wanted it. Now it was worth millions. Everyone in the family knew it. Everyone assumed the same thing. It would be divided neatly, a third for Dad, a third for Uncle Robert, and the rest split between the grandkids, including Claire and me. But I didn't fly to Florida for the money. I went because I needed to be seen, really seen, by someone who'd never looked away. When I arrived, Henry opened the door himself. He looked older, slower, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "You look tired," he said. "I am," I replied. We sat in his living room, quiet and warm, the ceiling fan humming above us. Outside, gulls cried over the gulf. For the first time, I didn't hold anything back. I told him everything, the dinner, the toast, the erasure, the years of invisible labor, the checks I'd written, the systems I'd built, the love I'd never been given. I showed him proof, screenshots of Claire's posts, the comments dripping with performance, the bank transfers that kept the family business alive. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, and with each detail his face hardened. "They said that?" he asked finally, his voice quiet but cold. I nodded. He stood slowly and walked to the window. His back was straight, his hands clasped behind him. "I always thought your father would grow into himself," he said. Then softer, "But this is cruelty disguised as tradition." He turned back to me, eyes steady. "I'm changing the will." I didn't speak. Didn't need to. "You don't have to ask," he said. "I've watched them take from you for years." Enough is enough. That afternoon, he called his attorney, a brisk man in a gray suit, who arrived 2 hours later with a laptop and a stack of forms. I sat quietly at the edge of the room while they talked. Henry's voice never shook once. No inheritance for my father, none for my mother, none for Claire. Everything, the land, the assets, the trust, would go to me. And a generous share to the women's shelter he'd supported for decades. When it was over, he looked at me, not with pity, but with recognition. "You've earned this," he said simply. For the first time in my adult life, I believed someone meant it. I flew back to Portland the next morning, no smugness, no gloating, no fantasy of revenge. Just quiet resolve. Because justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it signs papers in silence. I didn't tell them about the will. I didn't need to. I just went back to my life, head down, calm and deliberate. The balance had shifted, and soon they'd feel it too. Without the $500 I'd been sending each month, the cracks in their little store widened fast, fractures turning to breaks. Vendor payments slipped, shipments stalled. Then the IRS arrived with penalties and back taxes. Charm couldn't fix it, panic couldn't hide it. The illusion had finally run out of credit. By spring, the store was gone. No farewell post, no apology. Just a locked door and silence. Claire's empire fell right behind it. Her branding magic had been built on numbers she never understood. My numbers. I hadn't planned to expose anything, but months earlier, while helping with the store's taxes, I'd emailed a vendor proof of payment, one of the same transfers that kept their lights on. I'd forgotten that Cousin Jenna worked in that same office, so when the truth surfaced online, it didn't come from me. It came from the paperwork they'd ignored for years. Just a screenshot with a single line. Some people built the foundation, others just took the credit. It spread quietly, but in our family, quiet travels faster than gossip. The applause stopped, the sympathy shifted. Claire's charm cracked, and her posts vanished. My parents followed the same descent. The second mortgage, the unpaid bills, the home lost to foreclosure. No statements, no excuses, just smaller lives, finally fitting the size of their honesty. They hadn't fallen because I left. They fell because they'd never learned how to stand without me. When the dust cleared, the only thing left standing was me, and that was enough. The tech startup I'd been advising closed a major funding round. My cost-saving plan had played a key role. My manager called me into her office, handed me a sealed envelope, and said, "You're ready." Inside, a promotion, senior financial manager, a raise, a team of analysts under me. For the first time, success didn't feel like compensation. It felt deserved. Beyond work, my life began to fill with the kind of people who saw me clearly. Riley, my steady friend, was always there. Morning coffees, quiet check-ins, walks that didn't need words. Her kindness wasn't loud, it was rounding. And then there was Adam, a structural engineer with a quiet confidence that mirrored my own. We met at an event I almost skipped. On our third date, I told him about my family. Not every detail, just the shape of it. He didn't interrupt, didn't fix. He just said, "That must have been exhausting. I'm glad you stopped carrying it." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. Months later, Henry kept his promise. A letter arrived, handwritten, firm, final. The inheritance, the trust, the shelter donation, all set. At the bottom, one line stood out in his careful script. They had their chance. "You've done more with less. I'm proud of you." That letter sits framed on my bookshelf, not for the wealth it represents, but for the words I spent a lifetime waiting to hear. I'm proud of you. When the dust finally settled, there was no triumph, only truth. Their downfall didn't sound like thunder. It arrived in silence, the kind that feels almost merciful. I didn't win. I simply stopped losing myself. And in that quiet victory, I understood freedom isn't the absence of pain. It's the decision to stop performing for it. Some stories don't end with fire. They end with the sound of a door closing and the faint echo of what comes next. Letting go doesn't erase what happened, it just means it no longer defines you. If you've ever walked away quietly, you already know how the next story begins.